Rob Mejia, Professor Rob Mejia, a friend of mine, both here in New Jersey. Rob and I became acquaintances, I think, in
2019, I think. I think it was
okay.
pre-COVID. Yeah, it's been a long time.
Yeah. So, Rob, I'll just give it a little bit of background and then I'll let you take the wheel. Rob is a professor at Stockton University and he started up a cannabis program there, creating some curricula to teach about cannabis. And he contacted me as I have a PhD. I was a newly minted PhD studying cannabis, researching cannabis. And so we kind of got to talking about academia and cannabis and how those two things can and should come together. And so, Rob, I'll let you take the wheel. You know you better than I know you, so go ahead and tell people who you are, what you do, and why you're here.
Sure. So yes, I've been a professor of cannabis at Stockton for 6 years now. And when I started, we offered a minor in cannabis studies. And since then, I was one of the main architects that created a major in cannabis. So we now have a Bachelor of Science in Hemp and Cannabis Business Management. And that launched in fall of 2024. So we are the only school in the state where you can actually get a bachelor's degree in cannabis. It is very grounded in business. So students take 80 hours of traditional business courses, and then they also take 8 additional cannabis and/or hemp classes. And when they come out, they actually have their Bachelor of Science in Hemp and Cannabis Business Management. So that was a big deal. And we're a school of about 8,500 students. We are in Southern Jersey, main campus in Galloway, exit 44, for those of you who know Garden State Parkway. And then we also have a campus in Atlantic City. So those are our main locations. I am an author. So I have written 4 cannabis books so far. I started with the Essential Cannabis book in 2018, right on the day that Canada legalized adult use and medical use. And then the year later, I published the Essential Cannabis Journal, primarily for medical patients and also for people really coming back to cannabis. And then from there, just this year, I published Cannabis Careers, which is this book right here from Bloomsbury that came out in April 1st. And then I have a book coming out in just a couple of months. It is the second edition of the Essential Cannabis book. And it's gotten much larger. The first edition was 184 pages. This second edition is 328 pages, same trim size. It grew because I learned a lot from the first edition to now as to what people wanted to know and then also what they were ready for. So, one quick example is concentrates. In the first edition, I didn't really cover concentrates. And basically, I had a paragraph in there that said concentrates are just any form of hash and concentrated cannabis. But most of you are not ready for it, so we're not going to cover it here. If you want to know more, go check online. And I moved on from there. So that's one example. I now have a separate hemp chapter. There's a separate chapter on CBD. I always had a cooking with cannabis chapter, but now I have part of that covers make your own products, like make your own tinctures, make your own gummies, soaps, things like that. And then the social issues changed quite a bit too, because of course things right now are quite different than they were. Well, in some ways they're different, some ways it's the exact same as it was back in 2018. And so my classes actually helped me come up with some of the topics I covered. So for example, we had a session and I said, can you tell me what things in cannabis have not been answered for you that you would love to see addressed in a book? And one of them came up right away and said, "What about gun ownership? I heard you can't own a gun if you use cannabis." And so I looked into that and that's covered in there. Another student asked me, "What should I do if I have a police encounter?" And so I did some research on that and looked at what to do, whether you are stopped as a pedestrian or whether you're in your car. So anyway, those are some of the social issues that I covered. But anyway, the book the book got a lot larger, and I hope it is a very useful resource for people. And then I write a bunch of articles. I also have a background in brands, trademarks, and IP or intellectual property. So I have trademarked 3 terms in cannabis. Our Community Harvest, a cannabis education company. That's up for a 10-year renewal now. So that's actually been out there for a while. And then I also registered Roll Pride, which I think is going to be great for pre-rolls and smoking accessories. And you can imagine what the design is going to look like. And then the one I'm probably most excited about that we can talk about more is Garden State OG. And for Garden State OG, I registered that in the growing category. So it's things like seeds, soil amendments, fertilizers, watering cans, anything that deals with growing, that's under that umbrella, and also apparel. And then finally, I do teach cooking with cannabis classes, primarily to medical patients or for their family members who want to cook for somebody who is using medical cannabis. And I've done that for quite a number of years. And then I also do some charity functions where I do cook with THC, and people pay a princely sum for that. And that income is turned over to charities. I work with a local farm here, and they have been the beneficiary, and we've raised over $10,000 for them over the last couple of years. So kind of a nice thing. Sorry for the very long kind of biography and background, but as you know, once you start digging into cannabis, if you're a curious person, there are so many things you can do, and there's just so many areas of interest. And I felt like I was just at kind of a smorgasbord, and I just kind of jumped into everywhere I could, and still do.
We were just saying that although we encounter each other quite often, as we both are in New Jersey and attend some of the same events, it's really rare that we have actually gotten down together and have a one-on-one sort of deep conversation, because we're always, a speaker, or we're at an event where people are pulling us in all different directions, and it's just kind of like, oh, hey Rob, how's it going, and what are you up to? And then it's, we've never actually gotten really in depth about our separate expertise and knowledge in the cannabis space as both educators and authors, et cetera, et cetera. I understand that they get bigger with each edition. I have, the Big Book of Terps, it got a little bigger. Ed Rosenthal's Grower's Handbook got markedly bigger for his second edition. So I can, I imagine that it's similar for you. And saying that, not only have you learned so much since you wrote that book, I think the industry has grown and learned so much as well. So it makes sense to, put these things in as we grow and as we learn more. And it's good that you're keeping up to speed at the rapid rate that this industry changes, right? In your hemp chapter that you said grew a lot, or that you included in this new edition, are you just covering like the traditional industrial hemp, like grain and fiber, maybe CBD type flower, or are you including all of these products that are on shelves now being labeled as hemp, such as THCA hemp and what that means, and then all of the things that have been converted from CBD that's been extracted from hemp and then made into some of these other products like D8, D9, D10, THCO, HHC, THCP, et cetera, et cetera. So I'd like to hear more about your hemp chapter, because that's a really big conversation.
It is. And what I tried to do is kind of divide it by areas of interest. So the hemp chapter, the standalone hemp chapter, is really focusing on industrial hemp. And I wanted people to understand more about what an amazing crop it is, and what an amazing crop it could be if we were focused a little bit more on processing, creating some more products, if we were able to scale, if we're able to transport a little better. So that chapter really does focus on industrial hemp. And it is interesting because, of course, you're able to put in some remarkable history about industrial hemp, and it's strange that it got banned in the first place. It's almost like, getting cotton or wheat banned. It's like, how did that happen? Well, there's a pretty remarkable story behind that. So I do put that in the hemp chapter. And then I did cover CBD has its own chapter too,
Mhm.
because there's a lot of people who do want to try to heal naturally. They want to take care of inflammation, especially some people in the older generations who are coming back to cannabis. A lot of them are really gravitating towards CBD. So I do have that separate CBD chapter. And then I did put in some of I'll say the controversy about some of the intoxicated hemp products, the synthetic hemp. And I did put that in the science chapter, and then also a little bit in the international chapter, because what's interesting is as I've traveled, I see a lot of those synthetic versions in different countries. So that's where I covered it too, and talked about why they were selling that product versus some other products. And then I did cover beverages too, which is really poised to be a pretty incredible large market for us if we can get it right.
Oh, I was just gonna say, yeah, the industry right now is huge, and here in New Jersey, they've been sort of tossing it around. Like it is legal to sell in liquor stores. It's not legal to sell in liquor stores. You can only sell it in a dispensary. You can't sell it in a dispensary. And it's like, I don't even, my liquor store sells it. They have a whole section just for, THC type beverages. There are some that just have CBD. There's some that have CBG added. There's also some that have other, what do you call them? What's the word that I'm looking for?
Cannabinoids, maybe?
No, like mushrooms and things like that. Other,
Oh, yeah.
what's that word?
Apogenics.
Yeah, adaptogenics in them. So it's interesting to see those products on the shelf that don't have any alcohol, but yet, they're intoxicating.
Yeah, and they're quite popular. Liquor stores were very happy to bring those in right away, even though there was not the same level of training in the liquor store. They didn't have to have opaque windows. They're not particularly good at checking IDs. I don't know. I mean, clearly I'm of age, but I don't know the last time they've asked me for my ID or anybody around me in a liquor store. Whereas, of course, in dispensary, they do that twice,
Hmm.
and they're so diligent about it. So just such huge differences in that market. And I think that a lot of it is still to be determined. So even though now liquor stores have this little window where they're supposed to be clearing out their inventory, and then they have a few months where they can sell more, but they're supposed to be all out of the product by November, and then it's supposed to only be available in dispensaries. But personally, I've seen so much effective lobbying from the liquor lobby in New Jersey that I don't think they're done. I don't think they're going to let this go as easily as it looks like it might. So I think there's still going to be some fights, there'll be some lawsuits, and we'll see if liquor stores are able to retain that part of the market. People are drinking less alcohol substantially. But one thing they are doing is going in there and getting the infused beverages.
So do you think that the folks that, like the alcohol folks that you were talking about, do you think that you're saying that they're pro, like they want the THC beverages in their liquor stores? This is not the alcohol manufacturers. This is the actual like liquor store owners and that sort of thing, right?
Yeah, these are the wine stores, these are the bottle kings of the world. These are not the producers, these are the retailers. And the retailers know this brings in a segment of customer that they may not have otherwise. And also as they're losing people who are not drinking either as much or even at all, they need to make up that money. And how are they going to do it? This is one way they can do it. They're also, I have noticed that I think liquor stores are also selling more just general merchandise. I used to go in there and you'd see, some peanuts, pretzels, whatever. Now they have a huge food section. They have a little gift section. It feels like they're selling more stuff. And to me, that's a sign that the retailer's looking to try to make margin in other areas because they're not
Hmm.
selling as much beer, wine, etc.
And those beverages that contain THC, CBD, CBG, whatever, they're pretty pricey. Some, craft beers, a lot of them come in a 4 pack and it costs like $25 for 4 beers, right? And they're decent, they're larger beers, but $25 for a 4 pack is pretty pricey. But the cannabis beverages, they come in like a Red Bull can, like a taller, skinnier can, but it's pricey. It's over $20 for a 4 pack in many cases. And so, yeah, I can see how these companies selling them, that would be an attractive thing to put on the shelf.
Yeah, and they've definitely climbed up. I have a friend who works in the CBD industry, and they will be making THC infused beverages too. And we
Hmm.
were talking, and I said, "Why did you come up with a 4 pack? Why not the traditional 6 pack? Like beer has been in the 6 pack for forever, it feels like." And they really didn't have a good answer. They just said, well, I think it started in California and they just made 4 packs since everybody else made 4 packs too. And I think part of it was the pricing because they started as a 4 pack at $16.99. And then, as you've noted, it has definitely inched up and the cans are different too. I don't know if it's cheaper production, but yeah, the cans are taller and thinner. So it just kind of looks like a different product.
Yeah, so I was talking to actually a couple of people who are involved in the beverage space. Chris Fonts, who is the founder and CEO of both Trojan Horse and High Spirits, he was one of the first manufacturers of a THC beverage. He pulls his THC from the mother liquor, from the CBD extraction from hemp. So it is literally hemp THC, not even derived. It's a hemp extract containing THC that he puts in his beverages. And I can't remember exactly the year that he started that. I want to say they launched in like 2018 maybe 2020, 2021. But yeah, his definitely came in the taller, you know, beverage. They started putting CBD in beverages before that. When I worked for Mile High Labs back in 2019, they were making CBD isolates to put in beverages. And then they found out that the cannabinoids were sticking to the inside of the can. So, you make the beverage, it's at a certain percentage or a certain amount of milligrams. Then you put it on the shelf, and a month later, it has no cannabinoids in it. And so then there was like this push to try and figure out, okay, how can we make the cans so that they don't stick? And I was talking to Harold Hahn, who does nano emulsions, and I guess there's a term for that, and I can't remember what it is, scoping, something like that. That is how the molecules stick to that material, and that they had to figure out how to make it so that it doesn't do that. So, and that might be the reason that cannabis beverages are a little pricier, is because they have to jump through these hoops to make it a shelf stable product, where if it says it's got 10 milligrams in it, when you purchase it, it still has 10 milligrams in it.
Yeah, that might make sense. It's funny. It almost sounds quaint now, but do you remember the years when every coffee shop you would go to was offering a CBD version, but they basically were just taking tincture and putting a few drops on top of the coffee and giving it to you and then charging like $1.50 more. But I remember when there were so many of those shops all over the place, and it's like now with CBD.
Hmm. I don't actually remember that. Maybe I don't go out to coffee enough. Maybe it's because I was in Colorado and they didn't do it at that time. I think, it's different rules in different states, right?
Yes, yeah, that was one of the things because New Jersey had this kind of loophole that said that you could, depending on the way you read the legislation, add it into beverages. And a lot of people read it and said, I can do it, and I'm going to do it now and make my small margin on each of these.
Until they tell me not to.
Yeah, until they tell me not to. Yes. Then they send me a cease and desist, and then I move on. I
Right.
I do have two science questions for you that my students asked, and
Okay.
I wanted to give an answer, but I thought, you know what? I'm going to find out for sure before I give what I think the answer is.
Are these
So
your students from this semester?
from last semester, actually.
From last semester. Okay.
Yeah. So one of the questions they asked is, why do joints anew? And for the people who are not who are not familiar with what that term is, it means if you have a pre-roll or a joint that sometimes that when you combust it, ignite it, that sometimes it will get like a run in it. That one part of it will really burn and almost burn down real quickly, and then the other part of it remains pretty much unlit. And so people call that canoeing, and oftentimes they'll put a little saliva at the end of it to try to slow that part down so that the rest of the joint will catch up. So do you know why joints canoe?
Honestly, that sounds more like a physics question than a science question or something. I don't have a good answer to that.
So how about the second one? And this goes back a little bit. But do you think there is a reason that cannabis that was available back in the 70s and 80s made you laugh? I feel like that was a very common effect, but I don't feel like that modern cannabis really produces that. I remember when I was first experimenting, first starting or whatever, high school, college, that part of the experience was a lot of laughter. And I can still remember some sessions where we just had such a good time. We were laughing so hard. But I can't tell you in the last 10 years that I've had a strain where I felt euphoric, happy, a little different, but I certainly don't remember having anything close to a laughing experience. Is that the weed? Is that something else?
It's the weed, and it's also us. Okay, I remember in the 90s where, your ribs and your stomach muscles would hurt the next day from laughing so hard, right? Just absolutely unbridled, just laughter for usually no reason. Like everything's just so funny. And no, it's not the same. So the reason that I say it is both the weed and it's us is that back in the day, in the 70s, 60s, 70s, 80s, even into the 90s, we weren't selecting for THC. We didn't measure it. We just we just grew it and we smoked it, and we knew. And I've been talking to people about this. We would smell it. Does it smell good? Does it smell strong? Does it have a lot of crystals, which we now everybody knows they're trichomes, right? They're the little glandular hairs that contain the cannabinoids, the terpenes, all of the different compounds. So we thought we called them crystals. They're not crystals, but they are, they make the bud glitter. And then the hairs, the red hairs. If they had red hairs, this was good weed. And there are still cultivators out there that say you've got to wait until your trichomes are cloudy, or that you've got 80% of your stigmas, your little hairs are they're turning amber, right? So those are the red hairs. And so that's what we were judging our cannabis on back then, was smell, crystals, and hairs, right? Then moving into more modern day, strains, we started measuring THC. And since then, it has been a race to the top, largely because that's what the regulators are regulating on. You have to have, you have to put the THC on the pack. We want to know how fucked up you're going to get. We also know now that THC is not a measure of effects. It's not a measure of how high you're going to get, and it's not a measure of quality. But since we've been selecting for this single trait, we've been chasing THC. What we've been doing is ignoring all the other stuff and breeding that out. Because when you breed for a single trait, you kind of, you know, you're you're ignoring or breeding out those other traits. And so there is studies that show that cannabis, going back to the 70s, and this is, data out of University of Mississippi, El Soli's lab. They've been tracking THC since the 70s, and they've shown that the average seized cannabis, and that would be, your Mexican ditchweed and stuff like that. But, back then it was like 4% of THC, not what we would call potent, even though THC is not a measure of potency. Potency is how it affects you, not how much of something is in a sample. We don't talk about potent ibuprofen. It's 200 milligrams. Is that potent to you? Is it potent enough for you to work? Right. So we kind of use that term the wrong way. But over time, so 4% was the average of like seized cannabis. Over the last, 10 years or so, it's been measuring anywhere between 14 to 20%. And we know that, on the shelf, things say 30+%, but we also know that there's lab shopping and there's some inaccuracies with the THC reporting. But going from 4% THC up to 20% THC in the last few decades, that's an incredibly large jump for one compound. And I think what's happened is in the pursuit for THC, we've lost some of the chemodiversity. So we've lost the complex combination of multiple cannabinoids that would lead to various effects. Terpenes, probably flavonoids, esters, thiols, and all these other compounds that we were talking to Russ about. The complexity of the chemotype has, for lack of a better term, degraded because we've been selecting for a single thing. So that's kind of my theory in why the traditional, the vintage weed that we all remember from our teens, 20s isn't the same. It was, I don't know, better for some people, I don't know, worse for some people. But yeah, the cannabis today, it's like flat, kind of. It's just non-interesting.
So the information that came from the University of Mississippi lab, that was testing on cannabis that was seized. That was not the University of Mississippi cannabis, which they grew, which also I know was very low THC potency. Because I had a friend of mine, Irv Rosenfeld, who was the last patient to get weed from the federal government. So every
Mhm.
month he used to get 300 joints in a little
Yeah.
tin this big, and it had the potency on the side, and most often it was between about 4 and 7%.
So that's
And
there's a twofold thing going on there. So the University of Mississippi has been researching cannabis, cannabis compounds, those sorts of things, and it's largely chemistry related. And they have been growing it for a long time for research purposes. They are constrained by the NIH. As a medicinal product, it has to be a very consistent product. And we
mm,
know that flour is not consistent. And so, what they have to do in order to provide this medical grade cannabis to patients is that it has to consistently measure at, low dose THC, 4%. So, every single pre roll has to be 4% THC. mid-grade. Every single joint has to be 6% THC or 6 to 8%. The very high THC, 12%, has to measure 12% every time. And we know that the flower, there's a lot of flower that's more than that, just naturally. We know that there's a lot of flowers on, even within the same plant, that's going to be lower than that. So they
Mhm.
can't really take the flower, grind it up, and put it in a joint and have it be consistent because from batch to batch, from grow to grow, from year to year, even good rainy season, bad rainy season, because they're growing that stuff outside. What they have to do is they have to cut it with leaves and twigs and stuff like that to make it
Mm.
be the correct dosage for each specific joint. And so
That's
that,
funny. I,
yeah,
I, I feel a little bit guilty now because
same.
I had been denigrating the University of Mississippi weed once I had a conversation with Irv, and he showed me a couple pictures, and he's like, "Look at this. It's it's 5% or whatever, and it's got some twigs and some
Yep.
leaves in there." And I thought, wow, they weren't very careful with production. But now this makes sense, and I believe
Yeah.
owe University of Mississippi an apology. I had no
Well,
I had to
same, right?
I had
Same
I
because
had no idea they were in these huge constraints. I know they had a monopoly on federal government weed for 50 years, and they just
Mhm.
kept getting their license renewed. And now I think there are six growers that can grow. But it was interesting. I always wondered, how did they get that monopoly for 50 years? They think that part of it was that the DEA decided when they read I think it was the UN drug regulation, that they had to pick one source for cannabis in the US, and they picked the University of Mississippi to start. And then they just kept kind of going. And I think they started working with them in like 72 or three or four, somewhere in there. And then every 3 years, they just kept renewing, 3 or 5 years, renewed, until finally they said, we need some different sources. But I had no idea they were under those kind of constraints. Fascinating.
so yeah, the document, the UN document does say that you have to pick one single source to provide your research cannabis for, human consumption. And yes, the University of Mississippi was that one single entity. However, there's an application process. Like they had to apply. There were
Yes.
other schools that applied to be that one entity, but no school met all the requirements or their application wasn't processed because they didn't do this, didn't follow directions, whatever the case may be. When you have to do a grant, it has to be immaculate for you to be that one chosen source. And the program originally, they started with 100 different strains, named
Wow.
strains that they were growing for research purposes. Over time, it has evolved into they have CBD type, low, medium, high, and very high CBD. They have low, medium, high, and very high THC. And then they have a combination of balanced CBD THC. So there's about 9 different things that you can order. It's not, they don't have names. It's just the THC and CBD that they care about. They don't care about terpenes or anything else. All they're measuring for that research grade cannabis, marijuana, they call it marijuana, research grade marijuana is the THC content and the CBD content, and that's it. I haven't recently looked into it, but when I did my investigation, and I have pictures too of that really shitty cannabis that doesn't smell like anything, it's full of leaves and sticks and stuff, and it doesn't look anything like any kind of flower that you would ever have access to as a consumer on the legal market. And, come to find out, it's not even genetically similar to anything that you can get on the hemp market or the legal marijuana market. So, what is it? And I don't know if they've been growing the same shit since the 70s, which would make sense because, since then, our cannabis has evolved. We've been selecting and breeding and all that stuff. So, that would make sense. Or is it being cross-pollinated because it's an outdoor crop that they're growing for this, research grade marijuana? If it's being cross-pollinated by industrial hemp, then that would also make sense that it's, not the same as anything else. So I don't know what's going on there, but that is their constraint. That is what they were tasked to do is provide a consistent medical product to people who need research grade marijuana to treat whatever condition. So I feel bad that I was an asshole too, thinking that they were just putting out this shitty weed and then giving it to patients. But that is the task that they're following, the instructions from the NIH. This is what you have to do, which may be why nobody was able to get a grant to go through because they're like, we need to grow better weed and we're going to do this and that. And it's like, no, that's not your task,
Yeah. Yeah,
right?
that could be. And maybe as a university, maybe you wouldn't want to do that either.
Right. And
or as a
so
scientist, maybe that's not what you want to do.
the weed that we had at our school from the University of Mississippi, and this was in 2018, was harvested in 2014. And so it was already 4 years old, right? I looked into it again. We published that paper, I think it was, I want to say in 2021 or two. I don't even know when I published. But, they hadn't had another harvest at all since, 2021. They were still giving out 2014 weed. Super old
Well,
weed. And somebody, actually, it was Danielle Vergara, did an analysis on it. Very high in THC or CBN compared to the legal market. Not surprising. It's been sitting on a shelf in a warehouse, not refrigerated, not stored correctly. Like it's just stored in, I don't know if you've ever been into a lab where you have like bulk compounds, big cardboard drums of stuff where you just kind of put in a scoop and like mix up your stuff. Stored like that.
wow.
And so not surprising that, all the terpenes are gone, that the CBN is high compared to, what we would expect to see, which is just crazy. But the University of Mississippi the El Soli lab also does other research on cannabis. That stuff they grow inside.
Oh, interesting. I didn't
Mm,
know they did additional research.
yeah, they do.
That
Yeah.
is pretty fascinating. Although for some people, ironically, I bet the CBN is probably beneficial, depending on what kind of medical issue they're dealing with. I know that when I saw a couple of studies where it was beneficial for bone growth, which of course I think is pretty amazing for an older population, and especially for women who might have osteoporosis, that kind of thing. But who knows? Maybe that was actually helpful for some people.
I think I've also heard neuroprotective properties. So for people
Yeah.
with like Alzheimer's and dementia, it can be helpful. I don't know if you have to sort of start that as an early preventative treatment or if it can help sort of reverse some of the effects. I'm not sure. And a lot of people think that CBN makes you sleepy. CBN will give you a headache. It turns out, so I was talking to Ethan Russo, and according to him, it's not the CBN that makes you sleepy. It's the oxidation of the sesquiterpenes, which would also happen with age, right? It's the oxidation of the sesquiterpenes.
So changing things up a little bit, I do have another topic I'd love for you to sort of elaborate on. And that is as I've done more cooking with cannabis and I've worked more with people who do edible events and all that stuff, and I've met more consumers who've tried it. I think it is very interesting that roughly about 15% of people just do not either feel any effects from edibles or they take such a gigantic dose that it would make other people sleep for a day and a half. So do you have any do you know why people don't react to edibles? About
Yeah, so
15%. I mean, that's like 1 out of 6. That's pretty good.
so that is coming from Riley Kirk and Miyabi Shields' work. They have been investigating and researching and giving polls to stoners. Is That's what they are, right? So people who consume a lot of cannabis daily and often multiple times per day, and they're finding out that it was 15%, and as they keep digging in, it's actually, I think the number's up to 16% of people just don't feel edibles. And my understanding is, if I remember correctly, and I'm not a people scientist, I'm a plant scientist, so the physiology of people I don't often get too deep into, but if I remember correctly, it is Chrome P450 or something like that. It's an enzyme that these people just don't produce. So they don't have the capacity to break down the THC. So when you eat anything with THC in it, it's not going to do anything to you, right? You can't get high off of raw cannabis. You have to decarb it. So tell your students that just eat it. But okay, so when you eat cannabis, it has to go through your digestive tract, through your stomach, and then into your intestines, where it can then be absorbed. It'll go in, not straight into the bloodstream. You don't absorb things straight into your bloodstream. It goes through your liver. In the liver, there are enzymes that are produced that break down certain things, toxins, medicines, all kinds of things, right? So in these people, the enzyme that would break down THC into its metabolites, which would be 11 hydroxy THC. I think, is the first metabolite, and then it'll go through again and it'll turn into a secondary metabolite. They don't have yet.
I always thought it just went from delta 9 to delta 11. There's another step in there.
It's not even delta 11. It's
Okay.
yeah, it's 11 COOH. But yeah, it goes from THC to this first metabolite. But the people who don't feel edibles, they don't have the enzyme to break it down. So the THC is just excreted as THC. It doesn't go through that that breakdown and then go through the bloodstream and then get recycled and it goes through a second time, and then eventually it all gets eliminated through your urine and your feces is how it comes out.
Because that also makes me think that if that's the case with cannabis, it's probably that the case with other foods that they're eating too, or other things that they're putting in their body, that maybe they're not processing those either, and those might just be going. I mean, that's a good area to research, I got to say.
Yeah, potentially. And maybe some medications too. So
Yeah,
they tell you don't take, if you're taking certain medications. I know specifically the ones that tell you don't eat grapefruit if you're taking
yeah,
this medication. So those medications, same thing. Don't be taking cannabis and doing this medication, because the liver won't be able to break it down efficiently, because you know, you're going to be overloading your liver.
yeah. There's not a lot of people who are huge fans of grapefruit.
And I don't understand why there are so many beverages and edibles that are grapefruit flavored. Like they tell us, don't take CBD if you're taking these medications, and yet everything's flavored with grapefruit. And I'm like, but we know you shouldn't mix. I don't know if you're that. I don't know. I don't understand the grapefruit hype.
Yeah, that is kind of well. I have to say, I do think in the cannabis market alone that if you look at the flavors of gummies and all those things, there are such creative flavors.
6, 7, 8 years ago, all you could get was like grapefruit, cherry, blue raspberry was a big one.
Oh yeah,
For tinctures, it was all mint or cinnamon. And I
yep.
feel like uh, a lot of these flavors are trying to cover up the flavor of the weed, because
Hmm.
weed has a very strong flavor and a very
Yep.
strong smell. And so, you buy a good tincture, it's going to taste very weedy, or a drink, it's going to taste weedy. And so I think they're choosing flavors that mask or attempt to mask that strong flavor, which I think is a disservice to cannabis. I think cannabis has a very interesting flavor and could be utilized very well if we used flavors that enhance or complement that flavor rather than trying to cover it up. And I don't think that dessert type flavors or sweets do it any justice. I think that it would complement or go better in things like salad dressing, for example.
Yeah, something that's kind of real earthy and kind of weedy. That is one of the debates for people who do make edibles. There are some that really try to mask the flavor, so you would have no idea that it was infused at all. And they'll pick things that are pretty bold, like some deep dark chocolate, some chilies. There are some things that kind of outlast or out flavor the cannabis. Then there's other people who really want you to celebrate what it's like, and they
Hmm.
want you to smell it and to note the terpenes and to note exactly what it tastes like. So I've always liked that kind of debate between experience, but I do find that people who, if you're not doing it every day, I think they appreciate the taste because it is a different taste, and I think it also kind of it's a little bit of a celebration. It's unique. It's kind of novel. They like the taste. They knew that they were taking cannabis versus just having a good meal and not being able to taste it. Then I think you're kind of missing out on something. You're just getting a good meal, but you're not experiencing the cannabis. So I think I fall more on the I hope you like the flavor because you're going to taste some,
Like,
if not a
yeah,
lot.
so I feel like, if you're going to infuse some oil, you could do coconut oil, you could do olive oil, you could make it into a salad dressing with other herbs and spices on the savory side rather than the dessert, cinnamon, nutmeg, that kind of stuff. Like a pizza shake, with oregano and basil and things like that. Red pepper might be good. I don't know if you've ever had the opportunity to taste a male flower with the pollen in it. It also has a very interesting dynamic flavor, and they're spicy.
What does the pollen taste like? I mean, I've tasted leaves from the mayo plant.
It's kind of spicy, but yeah, it's kind of spicy. I had a friend who was growing some just for funsies. She was growing a couple of plants in her kitchen, and she doesn't know anything about cannabis other than she likes to smoke it. But she sent me pictures and she's like, "My plant looks weird. What's wrong with it?" And I was like, "Well, that's a male." And she's like, "Well, what are these things?" I'm like, "Those are the male flowers." She's like, "Well, I don't know what they are, but they're so tasty on eggs, on pizza, on this." I was like, "You're eating them?" She's like, "Yeah, they're delicious." And I was like, "That's really interesting." And I would like to dive into that more. However, it turns out I'm really allergic. But I think, if you've got some males out there, give it a go if you're not allergic.
Yeah, that's interesting. Well, I know a good number of people who eat bee pollen and they do it for health
Yeah.
effects. And I wonder if the cannabis pollen could be something there too.
Yeah.
Next time I encounter a male plant, I will have to
Well, and the male
take a little
flowers are
bite.
tiny, right? So they turn
Oh yeah.
they start as little, people call them pollen sacs, but they're
Hmm.
not really pollen sacs. That kind of, to me, I envision balls, which they
Yeah,
also
they
call
look like
them
balls.
balls.
I call them balls in my book. I said, yeah, they look like little balls.
But really what they are is, we know what a rosebud is. It's an unopened rose flower. These are male flowers, right? They're buds, they're male buds, and they open just like the other flower, just like a rose opens. It's more like a lily, actually. They open, they dangle upside down, and they open like this, and you can see the male dangly bits hanging down, and then at the end of those is the anthers, and that's what releases all the pollen, all the dust, the fine yellow dust that is the pollen. But people don't realize that's a full-on flower, like a proper flower.
Oh, that's cool. That's good.
Hmm.
Well, I learned that today. That is a good piece of information. And I am amazed at how much pollen the plants do give. I mean, you see, we've grown hemp on our little farm in Stockton for about 3 years. And the first year on purpose, we grew some that were male and some that were not. So
Hmm.
students could see what they look like. We also gathered some of the pollen. We used paintbrush. And then we also took some out as well. But but I have to say the first time that I saw how much pollen they released, it's like you just barely shook it, and it felt like you took a thing of baby powder and just went boom. I mean, it was just a cloud of pollen. I felt like a car with its windshield all covered yellow after shaking some of those
Oh my God.
little
Yeah.
stems.
Yeah. We had a male plant that we brought inside because we didn't want our outdoor females to get pollinated. And like I said, I'm incredibly allergic to it. So it didn't last very long because I was dying. But I have to fact check this all the time. But in Ernest Small's paper that he put out, it's sort of a monologue. It's the human utilization of cannabis. I don't remember the whole title, 2015, and it's a good read. In there, he states that, and this comes from research, one single male flower, so one single ball, one single pollen sac, can release up to 350,000 pollen grains.
Oh,
And there are hundreds, potentially thousands of those male flowers on a male plant. So you can
wow.
imagine how much pollen that is. It's a lot, right?
Yeah,
And that's just insane.
that is. How does that compare to other plants?
That's a great question. I have not fact checked that. I don't know. But
I wonder if cannabis is one that produces more pollen than most other plants.
so it would depend, right? So cannabis is wind pollinated, so it
Yep.
produces a lot, and those little tiny grains travel far. So maybe I should look and see, what these New Jersey pine trees are releasing, because they release a heck of a lot too, right? But there's other, some plants are insect pollinated or animal pollinated. So I would look at something that is also wind pollinated. I wonder
Yeah.
how much hops produce, because
Yeah.
they're
Right in the same
also,
family. They're
yeah,
cousins.
yeah. That's a good question.
Oh, very cool. Well, I have a couple questions for you about some words that I see in the industry all the time. And I want to find out if you think they mean anything or if we should be
You're
cutting
so
these. Why?
funny
What's
as
the
a
matter?
you're so funny as a lifelong learner and educator. This interview has turned into not me questioning you, but you questioning me, which is totally fine.
Well, I hope it's okay because yes, surprise, I have a lot of questions. Let's start with the word premium. Does premium mean anything in cannabis? And should it?
I feel like it that's a good question. Okay, so premium is going to refer to the highest quality in most. markets, right? Premium means top of the line, high quality, best of the best. However, in cannabis, there's this really irritating thing that we've been chasing, as we talked about, high THC. That's the generally the one and only thing they're required to print front and center on any packaging that a consumer might have access to. And really, it's kind of the number that people look for, right? So the higher the THC, the more expensive it is. They label it as premium, top shelf, platinum, whatever, because it's got the highest THC. So it goes on the top shelf and it's the most expensive cannabis. However, we know, I'm not sure all the consumers know, but they should start to learn that the higher THC is not an indicator of quality and it's not an indicator of your experience. A lot of people who are who are reporting the effects from a high THC flower, they don't like it. It induces anxiety.
Mhm.
It's not the fun, happy, cannabis of yesteryears. um it's it's not what I would call a quality product at all. Premium to me in cannabis would be something that it has complex flavors and aromas, creates a pleasant experience, pleasant effects. But yeah, high THC flower is not it. You can have a high THC flower with either no or shitty terpenes, just and not very chemo diverse. And I feel like it's high THC flower. It's like the Everclear of cannabis. Well, like you wouldn't drink that. You might add it to something. And I think that if you're looking for high THC products, you shouldn't be looking for flower. You should be looking for extracts. And if you want a higher THC flower, add an extract or a wax or a shatter or a, hash to your bowl or to your, joint to bump up that THC to get it to where you want it to be. But in order, we're just doing our customers a disservice having everything high THC and not having these balanced varieties that are more complex in the other categories.
It's pretty interesting that you kind of made the connection between high THC and premium because sometimes it is marketed that way. So you'll go into a dispensary and you'll see something premium, and that just means that it has this level of THC or more, versus like you said, some of the complex flavors, higher terpene count, things like that that people may look for.
And as consumers, we are conditioned to equate higher price and the word premium to a better product, right? And
Yes. Yeah.
so people think that because it's a higher THC and it's a higher price, it must be better quality. And it's just not true in cannabis. And we don't shop like that for anything else. Like, if there's a premium whiskey, it's not the highest alcohol. That's Everclear. What you want then, you want Everclear. You don't want a 50-year-old, scotch, which is going to be more complex in flavors. It's going to be, you know, crafted and cared for and all of that stuff. You expect to pay a higher price for it because of the love and the care and the experience that you're going to have with that, but you're not buying it based on alcohol content. It's just a really silly thing that we're doing in the cannabis industry. I hate it. I think they should take THC either off the label or put it inside the package where you can still have access to that information, but it's not front and center because it's really not that important to anybody, honestly.
Yeah. Yeah. That is totally true. How about shifting to another word that I'm sure you love, and that is craft? So
I
what's
love
your take
craft.
on craft cannabis and what does it mean? And should we use that word?
Love, attention, care, attention to detail, clean. I think that the, you know, I everybody hates it. I also hate it, but I don't know how, I'll either go the food direction or the alcohol direction, right? So there are craft brewers. There just are, right? And what they do is they have small batches. They take great care in what kind of hops, they're using, what blend of hops they're using, how it's, the mash, how it's distilled, temperatures. I don't know how to make beer, so I don't know all the parameters that go into making a beer. But beer, you would assume if it has the word craft in front of it, that brewer has taken great care to ensure that that is a very high quality product, complex flavors, all things that people will like. Now, not everybody is going to like every single craft beer. You will latch on to, if it's a craft beer, certain breweries that produce quality products that you enjoy. That doesn't mean that you and I will enjoy the same craft beer or the same brewery, right? And I think the same is true in cannabis. Same with wineries. Like, as a wine connoisseur, you might like specific types of wine that you can get at any different winery, but you might have specific wineries that you're like, I really enjoy that. And what you perceive as a quality product may not be the same perception as somebody else's quality product. But I do think that craft, especially in the cannabis industry, is going to be indicative of smaller batches. So you're not growing at scale. You don't have a wide swath, huge rooms of cannabis where you can't really pay attention to things like microclimates, outbreaks of various pests, pathogens, problems. You really keep it small so that you can concentrate on your product and do one thing and do it well, and that's grow cannabis. But if you've got huge grow rooms, I feel like that spreads anybody thin, where you can't have eyes on everything all the time. So anyway, that's what craft means to me.
Yeah, I think you've hit on a couple really good points because I also think of small batch at that point when I see craft. And I hope that we can kind of remain true to that word because I also do think, is there any way that an MSO can ever offer craft?
No.
And I'm with you because I think if you have such a large scale, you're already going away from that. It feels like your goal is different. It feels like your setup is going to be very different. It feels like your knowledge and what you're going to do is very different. But for me personally, too, I mean, for better or worse, I have biases where I like live soil. I like sun grown. I've always
Hmm.
been a fan of outdoors. I like natural soil amendments, worm castings and the like, or people who make their own tea and that kind of thing. So for me, I like all those things. So when I see somebody as a small grower and they're using live soil and they're either sun grown or even greenhouse grown, I am much more attracted to that than seeing something from a large producer that may be still good quality, but I still feel kind of like that. I want to be at arm's width from that.
Yeah, and in my brain, I think there's two ways you can go. You can go for quantity over quality, where you're mass producing something at scale and you can sell it at a cheaper price, right? That's the Budweiser of cannabis, that's the large MSOs. Or you can be a craft producer where you're concentrating on quality over quantity. Your flower, you might not get as large a yields, but you might have much better quality, a better terpene profile, whatever the case may be. But people are willing to pay more for a quality product. And that's the same in any industry. People are willing to pay more if the product is a higher quality, higher quality cleaning products. It might cost more for the same container, but the quality product might last a lot longer because you don't need as much to clean something, right? You might buy it because it's cheaper and you get a bigger bottle, but if it doesn't do as good of a job, then it's not as good as a product. And so there's trade-offs. And I do also feel that some of the MSOs, and I'm not trying to give them any ideas or anything, but there are some, large breweries that also produce closer to a craft product because they kind of split it up, like, here's our quantity, we'll just crank those out and put them in 12 packs, blah blah blah, and cheap ass piss beer. But then they have their smaller versions where they don't produce as much, and but it's still Budweiser. So there could be some of these MSOs that do crank out these large quantities of shitty cannabis, but then they have other rooms that they might concentrate on a little bit more quality over quantity.
I do think one thing that still has a pretty big effect on the New Jersey market is how expensive our cannabis still is compared to other states, or certainly compared to the underground also. I don't think it's a good thing at all. Actually, I find myself when I'm in other states, well, first of all, I will always go to local dispensaries so I can talk to their management, talk to their bud tenders, see what kind of product they have, look at pricing, all that kind of things, just because I like to do that. But you do go some places and it's amazing how much less expensive the cannabis is in certain states and certain areas. And if you go to especially like indigenous areas in New York where they don't pay federal taxes and where they often grow in one location and then ship to a couple of their dispensaries, you can actually find some really good product that is so much cheaper than Jersey product. So for me, I actually don't hate that sometimes there's some price relief in New Jersey, but I also am looking forward to having some more cultivators and more choice.
But I do think that all of these states that are selling their cannabis at cheaper prices, it's a race to the bottom. And how are people supposed to operate within those margins, right? Back in the day, back in the 90s, if you were gonna buy a quarter or an eighth, it was, for a quarter of shitty weed, it was $50. For a quarter of really good flower, it was $100. Why? And that's about what it is now in New Jersey, and that's what it used to be in Colorado. And people are like, it's so expensive. I'm like, it's the same fucking price as it was in the 90s. What are you fucking talking about? And and not only that, but like back in the 90s, they were growing outdoors. They didn't have the overhead that they have of these indoor growers. Now everybody wants cheaper, 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 but the cultivators are still growing inside. They have to pay for their lights, their, water, all that stuff, and we are expecting it to be cheap. Like,
Yeah.
that's really odd to me. I don't understand why people have this idea where cannabis should be cheaper. Like, I
Huh?
don't get it. It should be more expensive. And not to mention inflation, right? Back in the day, you could buy a pack of cigarettes for $1.99. Now, how much does a pack of cigarettes cost? I have no idea. I quit smoking. But I know it's not $1.99. I know it's more probably closer to like 8, $9.
Yeah, I think you're right.
So what makes us think that cannabis should be cheaper? It should be more expensive. And I just don't understand our high and mighty attitude about how expensive cannabis is. It seems to me like we're screwing over the cultivators. And no wonder, people are, failing mold and, producing shit. And then, so, they failed their mold counts. Now they have to destroy their crop. I'm not surprised that they're relabeling it as THCA hemp and shuttling it out the back door to sell because they're operating on razor thin margins. And people think, oh, you're in the cannabis industry, you must be making millions and millions of dollars. Well, we know that's not true. Even the multi-state operators are not making millions and millions and millions of dollars. Every year we see MSOs going down because they can't pay their bills or
Yeah,
their
they can't keep up with it. Well, I do think one of the things that you've kind of alluded to is what's going to be a big issue for us down the road, and that is indoor cultivators in environments where maybe we shouldn't be cultivating cannabis. I know that might be a little controversial, but I know even early on when I heard about all the indoor cultivators in New Jersey, Massachusetts, et cetera, and I thought, well, that's all fine now, where it's all state driven. But at some point, I'm sure we'll have federal legalization. We might have international competition. And then at that point, I really do worry about the indoor cultivators because I'm thinking you're an indoor cultivator. Now you have to compete with somebody who's outdoors, who's in Oregon, California. And then let's even look internationally. Then you have to compete with somebody from Jamaica, somebody from Mexico, somebody from Colombia that has, pretty much sun 365 and perfect temperatures and winds. And so I just wonder what's going to happen to the indoor cultivators when our markets really start to mature and when you get competition from other states.
But the sun and the free water is not the only thing that we need to be concerned about with an outdoor grow. If there's no way medical marijuana could be grown outside. We've got all kinds of pests, pathogens, molds. Cannabis is a hyper
Yeah.
accumulator. So you're growing in soil. If there's any heavy metals in those soils or in that irrigation water, it's going to
Yeah.
accumulate in the cannabis, and now you're going to fail that. So I think there's definitely a reason for there to be indoor. And some people, hate outdoor cultivation. They don't want sun grown. There is definitely arguments on both sides, but these controlled grows, I feel like are necessary, especially that we know that we're providing medicine for people. And maybe people who are using it medicinally shouldn't be smoking it, but it is the quickest way to get it into your body. And even when you're making, concentrates or edibles, that stuff is still there, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah. And the other thing about growing outdoor is in most of the United States, that would limit the growing cycle to one, maybe two cycles per year. What do we do in the winter months? Just not have cannabis? Is it going to
That's
be strawberry season where you get shitty strawberries for half the
what
year?
I definitely hope not. The outdoor cultivators that I know in places like Michigan and Colorado, you're right. Sometimes they only get one crop, sometimes they can get two, but they then bring a lot of that material indoors. And that's when they do a lot of the processing, and that's when they make their other products like the vapes and concentrates and really get ready for the next season. So I know that they can do it. I mean, it's not ideal.
So they would have to double their production size in order to have enough product for the rest of the year, where we'd only have double the amount of cultivators, the number of licenses, so that we have enough product to get us through all of the winter months. Yeah, I think there's room for both, but yeah,
Well,
just only having outdoor seems like we would be getting rid of a lot of the market.
yeah. Although unfortunately, I mean, I totally understand your point about medical patients and the way that you can really hone in on quality when you're growing indoors.
Hmm.
But unfortunately, on the other hand, I mean, we see what happens to the medical market once states go to legal adult use. I mean, New Jersey, 9.2 million people, and we had about 130 medical patients. Now we're down in the 50, like I think it's 58,000, something like that. It just really, I think in a lot of ways we kind of forget the medical population. As soon as somebody says it's adult use, it feels like the market really has so much more pull just from the numbers, the dollars, the clients you're going to bring in, that a lot of the medical stuff is left behind. And people will say, well, yeah, they don't have to pay taxes. Maybe you can have products with a little more potency. But all those things really don't seem to have done that much. That you still see those medical roles just really go down. Are you concerned about the medical patients and about that
I,
kind of
I,
trend?
no, I totally agree with you that if you're going from a med, I think that's a separate problem from, the indoor outdoor conversation. I do think that, we know that what medical patients are doing is they don't want to jump through all the hoops and they don't want to be on a list that they are a marijuana user for multiple reasons. Like, can you have a gun? Not if you're on a list, right? You have to go see a doctor. You have to get your card renewed. You have to pay that fee. Like, I know in New Jersey that I've heard complaints, they're limited in how much medical marijuana they can purchase anyway. So they end up purchasing from the rec market anyway. So I think these are different conversations and different issues that maybe we need to have with regulators. Like, medical patients shouldn't be capped at whatever it is here in New Jersey
Yeah,
or
three
Colorado
three
or
ounces.
whatever. Yeah, and they shouldn't have to pay for, their med card. There shouldn't be, I mean, I don't why are they put on in a database? I you know, maybe we need to figure out a better way to get these people their medicine other than the stupid hoops that they have to jump through that just really aren't worth it in the long run. So, yeah, I don't think we've done our medical patients any favors with these programs that we have supposedly.
Well, the other way that we've definitely failed them in New Jersey is with no homegrown.
Yep,
So,
100%.
so it is strange being so of all the states that have medical and legal adult use, you still can't grow as a legal adult user in New Jersey, in Washington, and in Illinois. But here in New Jersey, we're the only ones where you cannot do any home
And
growth.
is it in Maine that you can only grow as a home grow?
Yeah, yeah. Maine has a very interesting thing where you become a caregiver basically. So if you're a cultivator or dispensary owner, you become a caretaker for quite a number of people, and then you're responsible for providing them with cannabis. It is a strange, unique kind of unique market, really.
And I don't know what New Jersey's problem is with the home grow. I haven't really gotten super into it, but I do have some friends that are, very large, loud advocates for trying to get home grow approved in New Jersey. And I feel like, and correct me if I'm wrong, issues that New Jersey is just really not getting on board with home grow is that they think that if people are allowed to grow at home, then all of a sudden they'll stop buying at dispensaries and then they're going to lose all their tax money and everything's going to go to shit. But in in other states where there's home grow, the dispensaries are still doing very well. Like, we are allowed to grow tomatoes at home in New Jersey. Does that mean we're not ever going to buy tomatoes at the store? No, because either like most people have limited space, they can only grow a couple different varieties. They want something different. They want, maybe better tomatoes because you're a shitty grower. They want variety, right? So, you have a plant limit, and like in Colorado, it's 6 per adult and 2 adults per household. So maximum of 12, which means you can have a maximum, and it's supposed to be only 6 in flower. So there's supposed to be 6 in veg, but you're limited in your variety, right? 12 max strains. So maybe you want something different. Maybe you want to, maybe I don't know, all kinds of stuff. Cultivator, you're gonna want to like trade with friends. You're gonna want to, purchase something to take to a concert. You want concentrate. Maybe you want concentrates. You don't want to make them at home. You don't want to pull out your hair straightener and make.
Oh, yeah, start pressing.
Yeah.
You bring up a good point. When I was at one of the very first New Jersey meet and greets about the cannabis market, Scuteri was there, and he talked, and he was against homegrow because we asked him, and he said there were two reasons. One is he wanted to give the business time to get up and open and to be viable. So he was afraid that if people home grew, that the that the 6 MSOs we had that were soon going to be 18 dispensaries, that they would not be able to survive because we're all growing enough that we don't really need to go there. So he was
Mhm.
worried about that. And then the second thing he said is, well, people are going to sell their extra or their extra or excess. And I thought, well, here's someone who's never grown because I don't know anybody who's such a good grower that you
That
really have
they
that excess. Or if you do, that's part of the ethos of cannabis for me. That's when you work with a medical patient and you become their grower. So if I know somebody needs Blue Dream, I'm going to promise to grow X amount of Blue Dream for them. And I have always liked
right.
that kind of sharing, community, helping people, sharing information. All that stuff is good for all of us, I think. So I do think that home grow unfortunately pushes a lot of people out. Plus, there's also some people that just want to be around plants and would like to just grow a couple plants. It's peaceful, it's quiet, it's a nice hobby. Yeah. I mean, how awesome would that be? I did think there was a funny thing that Scutari said in the last about 2 months, and that was that he would now consider home grow a little bit, but maybe it would be allowed that people would grow one plant. And so, of course, I was thinking about that, and I thought, if he really does that, I am so tempted to do some kind of campaign of like, show me your plant. So I'm going to help people grow a plant, but those plants are going to be 12 feet tall and you have to get on a step ladder to get up there and help people with grow tips and seeds and everything else. But if we can only grow one, I'd be very tempted to say, let me help you grow the very best beast of a plant that you can.
Yeah, start off indoors, and by the time spring comes and you move it outdoors, it's already like 5, 6 feet tall. This is an
Exactly.
interesting conundrum, right? Because correct me if I'm wrong, but if you're selling cannabis without a license, you are now in trouble. Just like if you are a home brewer or you make wine at home, or God forbid you make bathtub gin at home, that's great. You can do that all you want. You can serve your friends if you like. You can trade with your friends if you like. But if you're selling beer out of your home, that's a no-no. You can't do that, right? You have to have a license to sell alcoholic beverages.
Well,
Same,
even
same.
even right now, if you grow in New Jersey up to 5 plants, you are subject to a $25,000 fine and 1 year in prison. Granted,
Yeah.
I've not really heard other than one person that got arrested, and they did have one plant. But other than that, I really have not heard of many people getting arrested. But the fact that that's still even on the books is pretty remarkable. I mean, for one plant, $25,000 in one
And
year.
it's crazy for reasons that I just mentioned, like, well, for all of the things that we talked about, like people are not going to be producing enough to be selling excess. And if they are selling their excess, then that's not legal, right?
And
Because you
and
have to
and
have a
they're probably
license.
doing and they're probably doing it already if that's really what they wanted to do. The fact that you told me I could grow a little bit and then I'm so good at it that all of a sudden it becomes a business for me just seems so far fetched that if that's really what you wanted to do, you're probably already doing it.
Yeah. And I mean, I don't know, but I'm sure there are people in New Jersey, they're growing it indoors. It would be nice to be able to just take them outside. We've
Yeah,
got
I mean we
the
are
sun
we
and the
are the
soil.
we are the Garden State.
Indeed, for a reason, even though lots of people don't actually realize why.
Exactly. Well, I have kind of a genetics question for you if you're ready.
Oh, goodness.
So I am in the process of working with a geneticist, in North Carolina to develop a strain. And the strain is going to be called Garden State OG because
Hmm.
that's one of the names I trademark. Plus, I've always liked kind of the whole ethos of OG. I mean, whether it's original gangsters, but then also you have ocean grown.
Yep.
So the original OG apparently
Mhm.
might have come from Malibu. You hear all kinds of different stories. But anyway,
Yeah, that's kind of half and half, I think, on what it really means, right?
yeah, so ocean grown has a connection, organically grown has a connection to. And one time I was actually wearing my Garden State OG t-shirt in a supermarket.
Hmm.
And this guy, we kept going down the same path with this one guy, he looked at me first time, looked at the t-shirt, kind of smiled, looked again, and by the third time we had passed each other, he said, "I could probably sell about six of those t-shirts to my friends." But I thought, well,
Own it.
if it gets more people to have interest in the brand or whatever, I'm totally fine with it.
There
But
you go.
I love that it's original gangster, ocean grown, organically grown, and maybe old guy. So my question for you is, in addition to a catchy name, which you definitely need for some of these strains, and we can kind of talk about the names if you'd like to, what else do you think would make a strain successful or unsuccessful? So what advice would you give me?
I mean, okay, so I see cannabis the same way I see food or produce, really food, restaurants. Like, it's so subjective and personal and preference based that I can't tell you what's going to make something successful or that people will like because you don't know what you like until you try it, and everybody has different preferences. Like, there's the old pineapple on pizza trope, right? I do not like pineapple on pizza. That doesn't mean that everybody will not like pineapple on pizza. In fact, pineapple on pizza is like the second most popular pizza in the country, the first being
Is
pepperoni.
is it really?
Yep.
Oh,
Worked many, many years in the pizza industry. So that tells me that my preference is not transferable to everybody, right? And so I can't tell you what is going to make a strain popular or not popular. I do think that it's kind of right time, right place. I think that names mean something to people, and I personally shop based on names, and it really doesn't matter whether it's cannabis or wine or beer. If it's got a catchy name or a fun label, if there's banana in the name, you bet your ass I'm going to buy it. I bought a strain at Social Leaf. Didn't it actually was one of the lower THC products on the shelf, but I bought it because it was called cherry water ice, spelt Wooder, which is how people in New Jersey say water, right? And I was like, that is a New Jersey name. So cherry water ice, bought that just purely based on the name of the strain. No other parameters given.
that's fair. I mean, you go in there sometimes, and there are. I mean, I both really enjoy the strain names, and then I really dislike the strain names too for some reasons. I mean, part of it is I do think, and I am stunned at how many people will name a strain after something that is a common consumer good that's already trademarked. It's in a different class. I mean, stuff like Gorilla Glue, Girl Scout cookies. I mean,
Crunch,
stuff that, yeah,
Skittles.
run Skittles that have meanings outside of there. And then you do see that often they will get sued and they'll have to change their name. And now we have GG4 instead of Gorilla Glue or whatever. So that part does kind of disappoint me, but I also do like kind of the creativity of the names. And it is fun sometimes. And there are some
I
things that will just make you laugh. And it's like, yeah, I think it might be in this particular family, and the name is kind of funny and whatever. And
I personally love strain names for the reasons that you just mentioned. There, some of them are so creative. Some of them mean something. Some of them carry, stories behind them. Some of them give an idea of where it came from. So, for example, Garden State OG is going to give you a little bit of information about where it came from, which is going to be the Garden State, right? Jack Herrera, right? That's a person. So it's
yep.
got a name that's attached to a person that people can associate with. Banana Kush, like I said, I'll buy anything banana. Girl Scout cookies is an interesting one because I'm not sure how that name came about, but it does invoke a picture of something in your head about what that strain might be, sort of a dessert strain, whatever. Gorilla Glue, I think of Gorilla Glue as something very strong and very sticky, right? which
Yeah.
the glue is, but
Yes.
also the strain is, right?
Yeah.
Which makes sense to me. And then there's a bunch of strains where I'm like, I really don't appreciate that name, and I do not want to say, can I have some cheetah piss,
Yeah.
please? Like,
Yeah.
and
I mean, there's the weapon, there's the AK-47. Not a big fan of that name.
or what are some of the, oh, Alaskan Thunderfuck,
Yeah.
like I don't, and some of those names are really misogynistic. Like, no self-respecting lady is gonna go and ask for an Alaskan Thunderfuck. So, but that's, that's kind of, this industry is very male dominated. And yeah, there's some names out there that I'm just like, really? You went with that? Hmm.
Yeah.
But, wedding cake, I'll buy that. Why not? It invokes, I like cake. Who doesn't like cake? If you don't like cake, you're a weirdo.
Are,
Peanut
are,
butter breath. Does it smell like peanut butter? Does it make your breath smell like peanut butter? I don't know, but I'll try it out just to see what that's all about.
yeah, peanut butter is always good. And I do see way more cakes than pies. I'm personally a pie fan myself.
Oh, I'm not a pie fan. I think it's that hot fruit thing that I don't like,
Oh,
including
okay.
pineapple on pizza. Just mushy hot fruit is not appetizing to me.
Well, when you describe it that way, I would not want mushy hot fruit. But I suppose in some ways that's kind of what pie can be.
I don't have a really great answer to help you make your strain more successful. I would say that, there's things that you can do to make sure that when it is when you get it to where you want it to be, that you produce a consistent product that people can rely on. Things can change from year to year. If things can change, it's not that DNA, the underlying DNA, that's going to change necessarily, but some epigenetic things can change, and mutations can accumulate, especially when you're doing a lot of cloning. Your plants can adapt or change over time to local, to differences in environment. What you can also do is register your strain to make sure that people are not stealing it and reselling it either as yours or under a different name. That cherry water ice that I bought, and I haven't named the company that produced it, but it, in our genetic database, it pinged, or it had the same fingerprint as Blackberry Kush from cookies. So, how did they get Blackberry Kush from cookies, and why is it now called cherry water ice in New Jersey?
Yeah, that's so interesting. Would you talk a little bit more about registering a strain? Because that is something that has, to my knowledge, really never happened before. And then you had some of the newer strains that came out, and you knew the growers and kind of the story behind it. Those things felt as close to registering a strain as you could. But now every day we're seeing dozens of new strains. But the fact that you can register them to differentiate them, to protect your IP, but then also to inform your customer too, because a lot of it is, as a customer, if I'm ordering Blue Dream, I want to know that's really Blue Dream and it's not something else. So I get what I think I want. And for a medical patient, that's got to be crucial that something works. You want that exact thing. So would you talk a little bit about registering a strain? Why did it come about? How did it come about? And who's kind of the keeper of it? Because that's funny. With something like a trademark, it's the US government that does it and all the attorneys and everything else. Can anybody register a strain? Could I start a strain registration company and say, well, Rob Mejia said it was this? Is that question too broad for you?
No, I just trying to think of how I can sort of summarize this. We've only got like 15 minutes left, and I have another
Wow.
meeting in like 15 minutes.
Okay.
But so registering. So normally, if you create a new variety of tomato, you can go down to the plant variety protection office and you can say, here's my new tomato. Here's what makes it different, either, morphologically, phenotypically, chemotypically, like it's got a different sugar content or lectins or something, and then here's a genetic fingerprint. So just the same way we do 23andMe, right? You send out your DNA, they take your genetic fingerprint, and they say you are most related to this, that, you're 5% Italian and 20% Russian. You can do that with dogs. There's a lot of genetic fingerprinting out there to kind of give you an idea of how things are related. So we can do the same thing with cannabis, because with cannabis, you can't go to the plant variety protection office and say, here's my new strain of cannabis, because they're going to be like, that's an illegal plant and you can't put it in our register, in our registry.
And
So
is that a US government run
largely,
organization, by the
largely,
way?
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, but the plant's been illegal in worldwide for 50 plus years, 100 plus years, however, whichever measurement you want to use. At least since the advent of genetic tools to do this kind of thing. And so there have been a couple of companies back, Phylos was one of the original companies where you could send in a sample, they would do a quick and dirty genotype and say, okay, and they made what they called the Galaxy, which was really a 3D principal components analysis that would tell you where your sample sat in relation to everything in their database. So
Hmm.
let's say you have a blue dream, you send it in, okay, it is genetically the same as all these other blue dreams in our database. Or your blue dream is actually over here. It's not that closely related to the other blue dreams. So then you would know, okay, maybe I don't have the actual blue dream. They have redone their company and they are doing breeding stuff now, but they were one of the original companies that would do this kind of work. And then there's Medicinal Genomics who also does this kind of work. LeafWorks also does this kind of work. The difference with LeafWorks is that they do a full genotype, chemotype. They will take a specimen and put it in their herbarium so they have a physical copy of your plant. And so that's a little bit more of an expensive route to go, but it really does mimic the way that you would register any other plant. It's not a genetics company, but you send your sample in, we anonymize it, we get the genotype done, we put it in our database, we can tell you, we will be able to tell you what its closest relatives are, if it is what you think it is. So, for example, if you're growing Durban poison and you're not sure if you were supplied with a Durban poison or if you got something that was maybe relabeled or something like that, eventually we'll be able to tell you that. As our database grows, our identification and verification will be more robust, more concrete. Yeah, and just that genetic fingerprint is enough to verify what something is. You don't necessarily need to register it with any kind of government entity that's keeping records because you have that genetic fingerprint. That's not going to change, right? Or if you're doing seeds, it might change a little bit, but if you're doing clones, that genetic fingerprint is not going to change. And so you can use that as your evidence that this is your strain because you had the original copy before it went out into the market. So for somebody like Mrs. Soul, Laura Campanella of Brothers Grimm, they have Cinderella 99, which is a very popular strain. They have the parents still. So they can send in
Wow.
the parents and Cinderella 99, and we can verify, yes, this is an offspring of these two parents. Therefore, we can register their Cinderella 99 as being their original Cinderella 99 strain. Anybody else who calls it Cinderella 99 and it's not genetically the same, or if it is genetically the same, but it's under another name, we can say, well, these people are, selling your strain as, I don't know, Thunderfuck 2 or whatever, whatever they've named it. And so this is called market maturity, right? So bringing this market maturity to cannabis will hopefully give information to the consumer. Like this says it's Durban poison, it's been verified by TrueCut, let's say. Therefore, as a consumer that you are getting Durban poison. You are getting what you're paying for, what you think you're getting. It will potentially attract talented breeders from other industries to the cannabis industry because right now why the hell would anybody breed cannabis if they're just gonna lose it as soon as they release it into the market. so
Yeah.
so for all of these reasons, genetic fingerprinting is something that I think is going to become very important as we aim to mature the cannabis market in terms of the cultivation side.
And if I went through this process with Garden State OG, when I have my package, is there some sort of seal or some sort of QR code or something
Yeah.
other than what I could put on the website that would say this was analyzed by TrueCut and here's what they found out, or here's why you should care, or here's my seal of authenticity, or whatever you want to.
Yeah, and you would be able to license it out. So you would be the owner of Garden State OG. You could then license it out to cultivators to grow. I'm assuming that it would be, something attractive for growers in New Jersey to grow because it's associated with the state and New Jersey people are very proud of their state. So you could, get some licensing money, agreements put in place, and then the dispensary would be able to put that True Cut verified symbol on the packaging, or whoever the producer is, put that True Cut verified symbol on the packaging saying this has been verified that it is genetically the Garden State OG. And then we want to carry it a little bit even further than that, and give the consumer an opportunity when they know that they have a True Cut verified Garden State OG, they can then, log into an app, put in information about their experience, and then we can start potentially connecting consumer experiences to specific strains when it's been verified that this is what it is. And so then we can maybe start saying, well, for a lot of people, their experience is this with a verified Garden State OG.
Yeah, this is such a good idea and something that I hope does take off. A little bit of quick trivia about my background. Before I jumped into cannabis, I was a licensing agent for years. So I've worked with other brands and trademarks, including a lot of children's books. So,
Yeah.
so if you, so if you've ever owned any merchandise from Peter Rabbit, Paddington, Spot, Maisie,
Oh,
Rainbow Fish,
cool.
I was the one that made the deal with whoever made the plate, the poster, the puzzle, the plush animal, the blanket, whatever. So I mean, this is
That's
totally
so
up my
cool.
alley to license into other places. I also worked with Olympic sports and a bunch of artists as well. This sounds like a great, smart opportunity. Plus, it sounds like it's just good for the market. It's good for the
Yeah.
people who are doing the right work, good for the consumer, good for the dispensary. That
Yeah.
should be part of their education too.
Yeah. Well, in our last couple of minutes, I am going to hit you up because I really want to trademark I want to trademark two things, maybe. So, Dr. Annabis, of course, as I've been, known as for I don't know how many years now, 5. My company, which is Annabis Psycho, Annabis Science Consulting is what it is, but I would love to trademark those, but I don't know how to do that. So, I'm going to hit you up on how to do that. And then just lastly,
Thankfully, you have such unique names that I would imagine that the path could be pretty straightforward. And that's one of the biggest things.
all right, cool. So just lastly, tell people where they can find you, where they can purchase your books, hit you up on social media, LinkedIn, that kind of thing.
Fair enough. Well, I am very active on LinkedIn, so you can see sort of what events I'm doing, where I'm going. I do put links in there all the time about my books, book signing, stuff I'm doing. So I would say LinkedIn is the very best source if you want to follow me. And then thankfully, my books are widely and easily available in many places. You go online, there's dozens of shops that carry them. I mean, there's the regular bookshops.org, Amazon, my publishers. You can find them at campus bookstores. So, short answer is if you want any of my books, go online and you'll find them. If you want to find me, I'm on LinkedIn and my contact information is readily available. Or you could really just Google Rob Mejia Stockton and you'll find all my information. And,
Yep,
and I'm
you're
al- I'm always happy to talk. I mean, I talk to so many different people doing different things. I enjoy it. I enjoy learning about things. I enjoy helping people, connecting people. I obviously enjoy being on podcasts, doing presentations. So I'm going to keep doing all this stuff for as long as I can, and then as much travel as I can in between.
fantastic. Rob, I would love to thank you for your time today, for your interesting conversations, your many questions. This flipped the script. I tell you what, I was not expecting to get grilled today, but we missed like all the things I wanted to ask you about. So we're gonna have a part 2 with you, I think.
And I guess apologies that things flipped over, but it is one of the few times where I get to talk to a cannabis scientist who I know is going to give me some straight scoop, which I always appreciate.
All right. Well, again, thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of your week and the rest of the snow that we're going to get this weekend.
Yeah, exactly.
And I will be talking to you soon. Thanks,
All
Rob.
right, very good. Thank you very much. Take care.
All right, you too. Bye.
Bye.